One thing that bothers me with the current implementation is that the user of our package needs to use the Chuck Norris route. So there's no way, if the users of our package want to have it in a different location, that they can do this right now. So to fix this, we're going to use a custom configuration file for our package and see how we can make use of this in our custom service provider. So the configuration that we want to use would live in a new directory called config. And in there we have a new configuration file that is simply a PHP file that returns an array. And this will then be used within Laravel. So we're going to call it chucknorris.php. And the only setting that this specific package has right now would be the, let's say, endpoint. And this is going to be /ChuckNorris, or let's call it route. That's maybe more convenient. Okay, and now we want to basically replace the static Chuck Norris that we have in the route definition with the value of our config file. So to do this, all we have to do is get it from the config. So here we can do config chucknorris.route, because that's the key that we defined route inside of our config file here. Okay, now this doesn't work because let's see if we run the tests again. This is now failing because the response is not a view. Okay, and that's because we are now not having access to our Chuck Norris config file right now. To do this, we can use a function called merge config from. This should be done inside of the register method of your service providers so that all the different boot methods that come afterwards have immediate access to your config values. So how you use it is you call this merge config from, and then give it the path of the config file from your package. So it would be the current directory, one directory up, config Chuck Norris PHP. And we want this config file to be available inside of the Chuck Norris settings. So if we now run this again, all tests are green. But similar to the views, this only means that our package internally uses this config file, but we are not publishing this config file so that others can use it and override the settings. To do this, it's similar with the views, so we can basically just copy this, and then instead of publishing the view, what we would do is we publish the config Chuck Norris PHP file, and we want to put this file into the base path of the Laravel application that uses our package inside of config, and there we just call it chucknorris.php, like this. Okay, and one thing I haven't noticed in the view video is you can also give these publish methods a tag. So we can say that this would be the views and this would be the config. And then when you publish vendor specific files, you can limit this to one of these tags. So if for some reason the user of your package does not want to modify the views at all, they can only publish the config file and they do not need to publish the views itself. All right. So now we have our custom config file and we are able to publish this. So if we go back into our Laravel application and publish again using our provider, we can now see that we also copied the Chuck Norris PHP file to config chucknorris.php. So if we now go into our Laravel application, we have suddenly this Chuck Norris config file with the default values that we provided. And now we can just change this in here, save the file, go back to our project, and now have access to it using the joke endpoint. So like this, you can have configurable routes and just in general provide config files in combination with your packages. So just make sure you can use merge config from inside of the register method of your service provider to have immediate access to the values of your own config file. This is especially useful if you want to be use of the config file even if the user hasn't modified it. And then you can publish the config file using the publishes method, and then users of your package can just modify the config settings to their likings.